DTOMtv, January 2nd, 2010. What we will be discussing today is the genetic alteration of the entire ecosphere so that someone can own it, so that the corporations that surround us, apparently, who willed the government and mend it to their will, can make a dollar and own everything on the earth that grows. Alright? What we have here is a situation where genetic alteration of plants let people own the plant. And that just might be changing a gene from one plant to another, or one species to another, like from a dog to a plant. And this lets the person or entity that created it own it. We have terminator seeds that don't grow the next generation. We have super weeds that are pesticide resistant. We have bugs besides the ones determined to be killed dying. We have altered proteins that are similar but not the same as original proteins. Other non-GMO plants getting cross-pollinated and getting genetically altered. Not in a laboratory, just out in the wild in a way that nobody even knows what's happening. Well, anyways, I found it. The World According to Monsanto is an excellent film. Everybody ought to watch it. Here's the head of the Agriculture Division for the United States or whatnot.
In the early years, I was involved in the regulation of biotechnology that there was a general feeling in agribusiness and inside our government in the U.S. that if you weren't marching lockstep forward in favor of rapid approvals of biotech products, rapid approvals of GMO crops, then somehow you were anti-science and anti-progress. Well, I think that, frankly, there were a lot of folks in industrial agriculture who didn't want as much analysis as probably we should have had because they had made a huge amount of investments in the product. I mean, I think that, and certainly when I became secretary, given the fact that I was in charge of the department of regulating agriculture, I had a lot of pressure on me not to push the issue too far, so to speak, the area. They were very upset with me. They said, how could you in agriculture be questioning our regulatory regime?
In a nutshell, in the United States, the Secretary of Agriculture doesn't stand a chance against the multinationals. But just how are GMOs regulated in the United States? The most crucial policy on the subject was published by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which is legally responsible for regulating safety of food and medicine. Title, Foods Derived from New Plant Varieties. Date, May 29, 1992. Principle 1. Foods derived from genetic modification are regulated within the existing framework that applied to foods developed by traditional plant breeding. Obviously, the FDA decided not to create a special category for GMOs. For further information, contact James Mariansky, who headed the biotechnology department at the time. He admits that GMO regulation was based on politics rather than science. How exactly did they justify their decision? Principle 2. The components of food as a result of genetic modification of a plant will be the same as or substantially similar to substances commonly found in food. In other words, the FDA considers that a genetically modified plant is equivalent to its conventional counterpart, what they call the principle of substantial equivalence, MOFOs.
How could the FDA decide that a GMO crop is the same as a conventional plant?
What we do know is that the genes that are being introduced currently, to date, using biotechnology, produce proteins that are very similar to proteins that we've consumed for many centuries.
That's the FDA's official position on the matter, which was toppled by Jeffrey Smith, author of...
Jeffrey Smith, you should check into him too. He has done a lot of work, wrote in several books. Now listen, we also have a situation where we have something like this going on. Cross-pollination from these plants. Here's the Guardian.uk, right?
Modified genes from crops in a GM crop trial have transferred into local wild plants, creating a form of herbicide-resistant superweed. The Guardian can reveal the cross-fertilization between GM oilseed rape, a brassica, and a distantly related plant, charlock, had been discounted as virtually impossible by scientists with the Environment Department. It was found during the follow-up to the government's 3-year trials of GM crops, which ended 2 years ago. The new form of charlock was growing among many others in a field which had been used to grow GM rape. When scientists treated it with lethal herbicide, it showed no ill effects. Unlike the results of the original trials, which were the subject of large-scale press briefings from scientists, the discovery of hybrid plants that could cause a serious problem to farmers have not been announced. The scientists also collected seeds from other weeds in the oilseed rape field and grew them in the laboratory. They found that both wild turnip superweeds are plaguing high-tech Monsanto crops in southern U.S. states, driving farmers to use more herbicides, return to conventional crops, or even abandon their farms. The gospel of high-tech genetically modified GM crops is not sounding quite so sweet in the land of the converted. A new pest, the evil pigweed, is hitting headlines and shopping its way across Sunbelt states, threatening to transform cotton and soybean plots into wheat battle.
That's from France24.com. Now listen, they're genetically altering our environment. They're recommending for the first article to use like Agent Orange, one chemical that's a major part of Agent Orange, and another chemical that's been outlawed in a whole bunch of places to kill those weeds that are resistant to like the pesticides that they're using. Now what's happening is pollen from a planted plant that's close to an indigenous plant has pollinated the indigenous plant, which crossbred them, and now the gene has moved over to it. Now listen, they're genetically altering our environment with dangerous stuff that we don't even know what's going to happen. The FDA leaves it up to the company to figure out how safe it is before they completely sell it to humans. Alright. The insanity must stop somehow, so we need everybody to understand what the heck's going on with their food. Here's a little show called Eyes and Nye. Remember that guy? Bill Nye, the science guy? I always knew I liked him.
So what's wrong with introducing a new line of food crops? Is it going to upset the environmental apple cart? Well, in nature, everything's connected, so farm ecosystems are complex. If we introduce a new species, one thing you can count on is that the other species are going to respond. Modifying organisms is a way of modifying the world.
There hasn't been a case that's been won against nature in terms of breeders breeding in some type of resistance that doesn't break down. There's tremendous pressure on the insects and the plants to adapt.
Well, corporations say that genetically modified food is the greatest thing, if I may, since sliced bread.
Right. I'm not saying that there couldn't be benefits from genetic modification. What I'm saying is there's a tremendous rush, again, just based on all-out greed, to get these things to market, to recoup their scientific investments in them. The problem with biotechnology and genetic modification is they're forcing this technology on problems that don't need technological solutions. Starvation is a great one. We hear that genetically modified crops are going to cure starvation on the planet. The real answer to curing starvation is reducing poverty, increasing infrastructure, and straightening out politics. So starvation is a great example. They're the ones that brought it up, not me. But they should be ashamed for bringing it up.
Because we have enough food, right?
Yep.
There's 1.5 times the amount of food on the planet today that we need. If you look at any advances in any science, the main ones came through the free thought, free exchange of ideas, things like that. The ownership issues bother me. How can you own a wheat plant? How can you patent a wheat plant? How can you take something that's existed for 10,000 years that farmers have approved?
May I add, Monsanto would like to see it that somebody owns, probably them, they hope, every single food from cradle to grave. Owns it. Your pig owns pigs, everything.
Room for 10,000 years. Stick a single gene into it and you own it.
So I know what you're saying. You're saying, look, we've been genetically modifying crops for years, and we're fine. What's the worst that can happen? All right, try this. Let's say we genetically modify this corn so that when insects eat it, they die. Okay, then the wind blows some of the pollen from that corn over here into these weeds. Well, they're really wildflowers, and they're butterflies that rely on these flowers, and they eat some of that pollen, and all the butterflies die. Okay, so there's a whole summer without very many butterflies. Now, these are the rare butterflies that fly at night. So the bats that would normally feed on those butterflies can't get enough to eat for a whole summer. So they don't have nearly as much success at making bat babies. So that next summer, there aren't nearly as many bats around to eat the mosquitoes. Now, these are the mosquitoes that carry a deadly disease. And they feed on your blood. And they give you that disease, and then we all die. See, that would be bad. Now, I admit, I made this up. But are scenarios like this possible? Or is this just alarmist hype? Now, we've been farming for 15,000 years, carefully breeding species at the pace of the seasons. But now it's possible to introduce a new species into the Earth's ecosystem, never before seen, practically overnight. And what's the hurry? It's not a race. We're the human race. So let's farm responsibly. Let's require labels on our foods, and let's carefully test these foods case by case. That's the way I see it. And I'll see you next time on the I throw words around like hybrid, transgenic, GMO, and genetic engineering. they're not always talking about the same thing. There are different techniques using different organisms and different parts of the DNA. We end up with different kinds of food. If we want labels, where should we start? Should labels show up on all food that's been grown with pesticides, on all food that's been hybridized or genetically modified? It's worth thinking about because
I think so, because I've just pointed out the fact that weeds are becoming super weeds. Bees, there's a German study where bees are dying from eating pollen off of corn, and it's killing the reproductive system. They said it's happening. And, man, they're genetically, they're making trees that are genetically modified that are pollinating other trees. Please, people, the insanity. I don't know if I should put this into a part 2 or not.